Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live from Film Fanatic headquarters. It is Saturday at 11:59. Pretty rainy, kind of shitty day today. Pretty dismal, pouring rain. But anyway, hope everyone's doing good. So I'm really excited about this show. I was thinking about doing this show for quite a while this morning, and it's a big movie. It's a big experience, or it was a big experience for me, and it was a highlight as far as a supreme highlight as far as I've gotten a chance over the years to see some really classic films in the theater, and for me it's like the ultimate way. I mean, you can have that experience or have an experience close to that. I think if you have a really good man cave, if you will, good surround sound system, a nice TV, and speakers, and you get like a high end, Blu-ray or 4K version of a particular film, that can, really be, like I've mentioned many times before in previous videos, a movie that you've seen many times, and then I've had that experience personally where a movie I've seen multiple times. I grew up watching, as a kid, saw it as a teenager, and then saw it a lot on DVD. And then when I buy that film on Blu-ray, it is it feels so fresh, the experience, and a lot of the times it feels like I'm seeing the film for the first time because of just the sheer quality of it, and the uh, truly immersive experience around it. And but at the end of the day, going to a theater, a really nice theater where there's a great sound system, it's a beautiful setup. That can be just a remarkable experience. It's pretty much like in for me, like in my life or in my free time, as far as a thing to do. Outside, it's a close tie to going to see a band that I really love, or going to a really great concert. But in some ways, it's almost an experience I crave even more and that I enjoy even more. But I've had the experience over the years to see some really amazing films on the big screen. And sometimes I've seen them where, there's been a few occasions where the age of actual film is pretty much part of a bygone era. Everything now is for the most part digital. But you still can have that experience with the digital world, especially with a lot of these films that have been transferred over the years that were shot in film, but then they are formatted for Blu-ray or 4K. But I've had a few experiences where I've seen films of where these um, movies were shown, with actual film. Some of the most incredible experiences I've had. I got to see Apocalypse Now Redux. I got to see that on the big screen at the Colonial Theater, and that was probably about 10 or 12 years ago. I got to see that on the big screen, and that was actual film stock, and I was at the Colonial Theater, and that was one of the most magical experiences. I also got to see Orson Welles' Touch of Evil on the big screen. I also got to see, which was one of the greatest experiences I ever had. I got to see John Carpenter's Halloween on the big screen, and that was actual film. The Strand Theater in Rockland has, really done a pretty fantastic job as far as these things. There was also a later horror film, a vampire movie, which I think is one of the best vampire movies ever made. A girl who walks along, a girl who walks alone at night, which is a an Iranian film, a vampire film, and that was shown at the Strand, and that was just transcending. And fairly recently, I got to see 2001: A Space Odyssey. I got to see that on the big screen at this beautiful theater in Orono. And, those experiences were transformative. And I'm going to include last night's experience with that, if not one of the top tier experiences. So last night I got to go see Eraserhead, directed by the legendary David Lynch. I got to see it last night at the Waldo Theater, and it truly was a remarkable experience. And it's funny because I have a long, long history with being in love with the work of David Lynch. So there's a lot to talk about around that alone. And the focus of this show is going to be about Eraserhead and mainly seeing the film last night at the Waldo Theater and the experience around that. And last night's experience seeing Eraserhead was it was pure magic. It really was. It was the sound, the sight. I mean, this is a movie too that I saw. It's interesting. I have such a long history with David Lynch and a real deep connection. But with all that being said, like I didn't see Eraserhead. You know, I think the first time I actually saw Eraserhead, I saw it later. I saw a bunch of his other films, and then I eventually saw Eraserhead. I saw Eraserhead probably like 15 or 20 years ago for the first time. I would say it's probably closer to like 15 to 12 years ago. And so it was like late in my discovery, for as far as obviously this Eraserhead was his first full length feature, and it really, really ushered in his career. It really put him on the map. But for various reasons, I mean, so many impeccable films, and just really when you look at the body of work of David Lynch, it's kind of like masterpiece after masterpiece. But for whatever reason, I just didn't get to see Eraserhead until later on. The first movie I ever saw of his was Wild at Heart. I was again, my history with David Lynch goes back so many years. It's kind of insane. Where like I remember I think I was 10 or 11 years old, and back when there was such thing as cable. You had HBO, Home Box Office, and ABC, and all the networks. And HBO was, even then, and I still think they are still ahead of their time, and probably the best, you know, production team or show or station that, just as far as shows that they produced and they created, and then the movies that they were showing, especially during the time when I saw Wild at Heart, was, aeons, ahead of where we are now as far as streaming and all of these other networks. They were the first company to put out television shows. But I was like 11, probably 11 or 12, and they would show movies on, regular, like Friday, Saturday nights. They'd have movies all the time. And I remember seeing Wild at Heart for the first time. And it just blew me out of the water. Like I had never seen anything like that ever before. It was my introduction to the great Willem Dafoe and Nicolas Cage and Laura Dern. It was a transcending experience, and also introduced me to what would become my favorite composer of all time, Angelo Badalamenti, who worked on all of Lynch's films. So And I remember the first time, and again, it was many, many years later. I was like, I think I was in my mid to late 20s when I first saw Eraserhead. It was definitely, I didn't see Eraserhead until after college. And I remember seeing it, I think I rented it on DVD or something. After I got out of college, like I grew up always watching movies and always loving movies, but it wasn't until I was in my, mid to late 20s where, that was the time of when DVDs were, the craze. That was like kind of the evolution. You went from like beta to VHS to DVD, or I should say, in between Laserdisc, and then DVD, and then Blu-ray, and then 4K. So it was probably in my mid to late 20s after school, after college, that was when I first started to, I guess, for all intents and purposes, I started building a movie collection. I started buying DVDs, and around that time, shortly after or within 5 years or so, was when I first saw Eraserhead. And that movie just totally, I don't know, in a lot of ways, just kind of annihilated me when I first saw it. I really loved it, but I don't know. I, compared to all of the other films that I had seen of his, I had a different, you know, a much different experience. Like with Wild at Heart and Lost Highway, Mulholland Drive, The Elephant Man, Blue Velvet. I mean, the list is just endless. Dune. When I first saw Racerhead, and I was young when I saw it, I loved it and I was transfixed by it, but it just felt there was something about it where it was so I felt like I couldn't breathe while I was watching it. It felt really claustrophobic, and I it was like being trapped in this, you know, terrible nightmare, like this fevered nightmare, and you couldn't wake up from it. And it was kind of unrelenting, and there was no way of getting out of it. Like it was just so claustrophobic. And and again, I saw that was my. I remember like it was yesterday, but I remember when I first saw Eraserhead, it was like this really claustrophobic, feeling of like almost feeling like something is pushing on your chest, like a physical kind of reaction to it. And then a couple of years later, I saw it again, and I still had that experience, and I thought it was amazing and just like otherworldly and unlike anything I'd ever seen. But it was harder. I don't know, harder to get through or to I don't know to a point to a degree almost enjoy as much as I because generally I really enjoy his work. My favorite David Lynch film of all time is Blue Velvet. And again, when I first saw Wild at Heart, a couple of years later was when David Lynch started the series Twin Peaks. And I remember as a kid watching that. And that was a show, the first two seasons are just, complete, the just, it's a pure masterpiece. And that's what got me into David Lynch. It was that movie and then the series. And it was just like the height, you know, the, it was such a unique time because that show was so popular and the show being so incredibly strange and so dark, but yet it was, I don't know, it was embraced by middle America. Like it was amazing. When you look back at that time where they were, David Lynch was on and the cast of Twin Peaks, they were on the cover of Time magazine. They were like celebrities. They were rock stars. They were on like all the talk shows and it was such a bizarre, twisted little show and tragic and horrific. But it was like everybody and their grandmother loved the show. It was such a unique time in history, and that show really, really put Lynch on made him a household name, if you will. But so when I first saw Eraser, I had that very intense experience, and then when I saw it, you know, a few years later, I remember seeing it on DVD, and I again had that same experience. And then probably about 8 years ago or so, I bought Eraserhead on a DVD. I bought the Criterion Collection, and which is amazing. Criterion, of course, is one of the big companies or labels that puts out a lot of classic foreign movies, a lot of American classics, and at first Criterion, Criterion's one of the greatest companies as far as putting out re-releases of films because they they put out these really beautiful packages. There's always lots of special features. The films are always restored. They've done a lot of Ingmar Bergman films, but at the time when I first came across the Criterion Collection, they were pretty much specializing in a lot of foreign films, art house films, and what have you. Since then, and even more recently, they've expanded to where you can more or less find some horror. They release certain horror films now, and even films that could be considered like horror exploitation movies. They've expanded their catalog extensively. It's not just like foreign films or art house films. Like I've seen lots of David Cronenberg films that they've put out, and Criterion does again a meticulous job with restorations and also putting out director's cuts. So I got this Criterion Collection on DVD of Eraserhead, which is amazing. I don't have it on Blu-ray, which I need to get. I had never seen it on Blu-ray, but this DVD quality, this DVD version is incredible. There's all kinds of amazing interviews with David Lynch and the filmmakers and people involved in the film. Just incredible. It really goes in depth to and you really get a sense of like David Lynch's just strange journey as a filmmaker and how the path evolved for his career and how Eraserhead eventually found an audience. It's just amazing. But last night the two folks who run the Waldorf After Dark are just awesome. Sam and Buffy, they're really great friends. They're great friends, and they're great movie buddies. We've gone to lots of movies together. I've gotten to know them over the last couple of years, and they're just amazing people. And they started this series, The Waldorf After Dark, probably 2-3 years ago now. It's been a few years. And The Waldorf After Dark is just a special, special thing because what they do, a lot of the times they show a lot of quote unquote B movies, a lot of 80s movies, exploitation movies, and all these things. Some movies I've seen there have just been incredible. Halloween, they had Suspiria, Dario Argento's, and that was just amazing to see on the big screen. Maniac Cop, Akira. I've seen some just incredible films there. And also have been turned on to certain films I've never seen before. But the version of Eraserhead last night that they showed was just incredible. It was I guess a high-end Blu-ray version of Eraserhead, and it was part of the Criterion Collection. And the sight and sound was just jaw-dropping, just completely jaw-dropping. And like I said in the beginning of the show about my experiences of going to see some, really classic films on the big screen, this was bumped up to probably the top three because it was, you talk about immersion. This is it was the very definition of completely being immersed in a film and having that real cinematic experience of total immersion of sight and sound. So incredibly powerful. Well, you literally forget about everything else around you and you're transported. And that's what this experience was. It really was. pure magic. One of the other really cool factors of The World After Dark, Buffy and Sam, they go out of their way to really, not only do they bring these incredible movies to the big screen, but they really create a vibe, when you walk into the theater. And they had such a great, wonderful, wonderful display of all of this amazing, David Lynch memorabilia and just awesome. And they really, really give you an experience. And one of the cool things that they did too was they were playing an interview, as people were coming into the theater, and there was a lot of people there. And I figured for a David Lynch film or David Lynch films, there would be, quite a few folks out there because as bizarre and as strange as his movies are, you know, for some reason he has that connection with, with, you know, I don't know, straight normal people. Like it's weird. I know of a lot of people that are kind of like, pretty straight and narrow and live kind of normal lives or whatever. But I've met a lot of people that have that, but they're also really into David Lynch, and I'm always, you know, surprised by that, and because a lot of these folks that I've met or that I'm friends with, you know, tend to not have like the most eclectic taste that way. So, but for some reason, David Lynch resonates with a lot of people. And I mean, I think he was a genius. I mean, a visionary in every way, shape, or form. And for me personally, it's like, again, for me, as a musician or what have you, and as an artist, like, in particular, you know, in particularly like or particularly like related to my band Quantum, the his influence. I mean, there's so many. Obviously, I've talked about my band Quantum a lot, and that's my weird electronic group, and I write music for that. And I've talked about how cinema has the biggest influence for that band, and also with music and all of these other things. But cinema has the biggest, you know, influence on how I put together the music and how we present ourselves. But with me, for me, David Lynch is the biggest. He definitely has the biggest influence on me because, again, I strive to do it. I don't think I do it, and it's up to people's interpretations. If they like the music or not. And that's fine. I strive to do it, and you know, maybe someday I'll get there, but I don't feel like it's close. But I strive to do it. And it's that what I try to do with my band Quantum is have that experience of where it is like that experience last night, where it's not just one part of your senses. Like it's going to be, like seeing Eraserhead last night. It was completely immersive, and it's cinematic, and it puts you in this other world, and where it kind of transcends time and space and your imagination. And that's what I strive to do with what we do as a band, with our music and also our presentation, using masks and like having like a theatrical element, and incorporating lights and all those things. That's what I strive to do. I don't think I'm there yet, but that's what my main influence is, and it's about trying to have and share that experience. That's it for me. So, and it was interesting because my really great friend Erin Kirkpatrick was also there, and I didn't talk to her about Eraserhead before. I didn't know. I haven't really even talked to her much about David Lynch, and so she sat there and both watched it, and I remember after it was done, just being kind of stunned and in awe after the film was was done to the very, the end with the credits, I remember talking to her right away, and she said it was the first time she's ever seen Eraserhead, and I was just like, whoa, like holy shit, to see it this way for the first time. And again, this is a movie, Eraserhead. I've seen it so many times, but now it was truly like seeing it for the first time, and I was just blown away by, wow, what that must have been like in her shoes to have this experience for the first time and in this format, because it was definitely the best version of the film I'd ever seen and the best experience I ever had. And for me personally, I had a very different experience seeing it this time. It literally was like it had been probably maybe 5 years or so since I've seen Eraserhead. So, but for me, it literally was that experience of like seeing it for the first time. And I had a whole different reaction to it. Really interesting. You know, like I described before, how like some of my experiences, of seeing the movie for the first time, it always felt like I knew it was genius work. But it always, compared to some of the other films, it was, I don't know, I felt like I always, compared to some of the other body of work of David Lynch, like it was a little bit more of a smothering and unrelenting experience. And I sometimes almost felt like I have to be in a certain kind of state of mind to watch it or to experience Eraserhead. Because there's very little dialogue. It's like an immersive art piece. And so, and I always felt like I have to be in a certain state of mind to want to experience it. I can't just like throw it in or that kind of thing. Whereas like with Blue Velvet or Wild at Heart, like those films I can just watch anytime. But I found myself last night, as intense and as dark as the film is. And it's got so many great elements. I mean, it's got, you have, the surrealistic elements, the dreamlike elements. It's very feels like a horror film. It's got horror elements. It definitely has a big time science fiction vibe to it. And again, those ways, or the way I've described the film in my experiences, before, where it's very claustrophobic and unrelenting. I felt like last night watching it, it still had that I still had that feeling, but it was different because for me it was like um it felt really soothing, and I felt like it was really meditative and transformative, and it was quieter and more meditative for me, and I enjoyed it even more. So I had a really different experience. Just incredible, just an incredible film. It's hard to believe this came out in 1977. I mean, talk about ahead of his time, And this movie had such a weird, kind of history where like nobody really saw it for a while, and then it started playing at these like midnight showings, I believe in like California, and it couldn't find a way, and then it found an audience with like people who were into like, well, weird exploitation movies. It was paired a lot with John Waters films, the Pink Flamingos, and it found this cult, base, and it just grew over the years to where now, so many years later, it's regarded as a masterpiece, and it's amazing. And I had this totally different experience. Like I could easily watch this movie, and not have that feeling like I have to be in a certain state of mind. I felt like I could, and the way my experience was last night is I could just watch it anytime and just have a truly remarkable experience. And again, it's so beautiful. The thing that I love about Lynch's work is the juxtaposition of kind of the light and dark. You have these horrific, terrifying elements, but yet it is so rapturous and beautiful and sublime. And there's this juxtaposition with his films where there, you have the sense of the beauty of what life is or can be, but then there's this underlining darkness or these black clouds moving in, and it's kind of like right in the middle. You feel like as a viewer and as a person experiencing the art, you feel like you're in the middle. And I for me, like I feel like what David Lynch was able to do as a director, and he sadly passed away this year, which was really 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 sad. But his body of work, I mean, is he's immortal forever. And but I feel like for me, as an artist, David Lynch really does such a great service in sharing the human experience. Because I feel like what he does in his films, even though they're so incredibly strange and bizarre and dark and twisted and beautiful and gorgeous and lush, to me, it's like that's how, kind of, for me personally, that's like how life is. And it just feels like that, you know, senses up for that's, for me, that really gives me a sense of what life is. So it's very deep. But yet, there's a lot of humor also. That all that being said, there's a lot of humor in Eraserhead. There's a lot of levity in his films, even though you're getting, it's kind of a surrealistic nightmare. It's so beautiful, but then there's a lot of humor, and so there's it's not unrelenting, and I just feel like he does he strikes he was able to strike that balance as a director like unlike anyone else. So amazing. And I guess the two other movies they're going to be showing, they're doing this whole big tribute to the life and work of David Lynch, the World After Dark. They're going to be showing Wild at Heart, which I hope I get to see that I hope it can work out and I can go to that because, oh man. And then they're also going to be showing Mulholland Drive. So very, very excited about that. So stay tuned for those, and I'm sure they're going to be promoting those pretty soon. But what a mesmerizing experience this was. A true work of art and genius that was David Lynch. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.